Thank you for coming today, sharing part of your weekend with us here. I have with me today Ambassador Abderahman Salaheldin, Egypt's ambassador to Turkey, and the one and only Dr. Ossama Hassanein, the chairman of TechWadi. My name is Atef El Toukhy, and I welcome you to the International House, where I serve as the treasurer of the board of trustees here. I have been involved with the I-House ever since our family foundation endowed a graduate fellowship for the benefit of students from Egypt and the Middle East at large. Likewise, our endowed graduate scholarship at Stanford University School of Engineering has been awarded to deserving students from a wide swath of Middle Eastern countries. Over the years, the recipients of our awards have been top-notch students from some of the best universities in the Middle East, such as Anadolu University, Istanbul University, Istanbul Technic University, University of Tehran, and my two alma maters, Cairo University and the American University in Cairo. I mention this as an example of how we, the Middle East diaspora here in the United States, can extend our hands across borders and oceans to try and help our countries back home. And I can assure you that the feedback and the satisfaction you get from being able to help these young people is the greatest gift you can get. For example, once a year, around Thanksgiving time, which is coming on us here, my wife and I gather many of these students at our home for a festive family celebration. One of the questions that I typically ask on these occasions, I ask the students, why did you select to come here? You could have gone anywhere else. Why the Bay Area? And invariably, the answer has to do with a mix of A, because of Stanford and Berkeley being world famous, and B, because of great opportunities in high-tech startups. So, in effect, the attraction for these very bright young people to come to the Bay Area stems in part due to the allure of Silicon Valley as the cradle of entrepreneurship in the United States. we can easily extrapolate this to where we all agree that the rise of entrepreneurship, which is our subject here in this panel and discussion today, the rise of entrepreneurship in the Middle East is undoubtedly a key driver of economic growth and social development. Some may even go further than this, emphasizing the role of entrepreneurship in building a healthy middle class in any society. And when I talk about entrepreneurship, I'm not just talking about, high-tech startups and, the IPOs and that. I'm talking about, the mom and pop small shops, the microfinance project that you can help with. All these things are started by entrepreneurs that sometimes need some help to get their ideas implemented. Actually, my own life story is a testament of the efficacy of entrepreneurship. I started my career way back, prehistoric probably for some of the young people around. I started in academia as an assistant professor at University of Southern California in Los Angeles. But not long after that, this entrepreneurial spirit and the allure of Silicon Valley started tugging at my heart. And eventually, I had to oblige. So I moved to the Bay Area with my wife and my young son in the early 1980s. And over the years, I was fortunate to be able to start 2 computer storage companies and took them public. Many years later, I launched a new career in the investment management business, a field in which I had no formal training whatsoever. Yet, working with many others, I was able to start 2 registered entities, a broker-dealer and an investment advisor, with offices in San Jose and San Francisco. A more recent example of entrepreneurship in my life is the involvement in launching a business incubator at the American University in Cairo, AUC, where I serve as a member of the board of trustees, chairing the investment committee and the institutional advancement committee. So the team for for launching the incubator included many prominent professors at AUC under the capable leadership of Professor Sharif Kamel, the Dean of the School of Business. In order to get the fundraising started for the project, my wife and I arranged a dinner event at our home in Woodside about a year ago, in which Dr. Lisa Anderson, the president of AUC, addressed a distinguished group of businessmen, entrepreneurs, and academicians. Some of them are here today. Today, I am happy to report to you that the business incubator is up and running at AUC, and it's now called the Venture Lab. The Venture Lab is kind of like a translation into academia from a business incubator. And I just brought a few slides with me to highlight the mission and impact of this important project on the Egyptian economy. So I'll just go through these slides here quickly so that I don't take too much time, and hopefully it's going to be brief. I will not comment too much on the slides here. I'll just let you take a look at them in order to save time for my prominent panelists. But I will be available later on to take a few questions. The objectives of the Venture Lab, you can see here. I really want to focus on one item that I get involved in myself too when I go to AUC, as I will be next week, promoting role models. I was astonished myself as to the effect of that, because when I go and sit with young students and tell them about what I was able to do and the challenges and opportunities that are available here in this wonderful society that we're very fortunate to come to, they really, you can see, their eyes are, looking, and their minds are working, and this really gives them a sense of what they can do themselves. So I really invite you to participate in as many things to attempt to do something at home, work with others. Certainly we are very open at AUC and its Board of Trustees to work with many universities and many institutions in Turkey and many other countries. So we can talk about that later on. To start with, we put some metrics about the which types of, what can we measure about performance? How can we measure performance? And I guess like Mr. Goodnick said before about Milton Friedman, if you can't measure it, just measure it anyway. So we have some hopes, some measures here to try and assess how successful we are. And then some criterion about the startups. Ideas, the businesses themselves, and the entrepreneurs and their background. These are all factors that we use for trying to select which ideas would be funded. And we make competition. There are competitions where we, you will see here that the impact, just incredible. This has been going on even before launching before officially launching the Venture Lab. We had courses about entrepreneurship, and we've been involved in attempting to train the entrepreneurs and try to help them get started. So, yeah, like I said, we can discuss about this later on in the discussion time. But right now, without further ado, it's my true honor and distinct pleasure to introduce to you a good friend of mine, Ambassador Abderahman Salaheldin, Egypt's ambassador to Turkey. His illustrious career includes many prominent diplomatic assignments, most notably serving as Egypt's general consul here in San Francisco from 2004 through 2008. Since then, Ambassador Abderahman has become the beloved friend of the Egyptian community throughout California. Here he is. Please help me welcome Ambassador Abderahman.
Thank you, Dr. Atef, for a very kind introduction. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Ossama, for a very gracious invitation and for co-sponsoring this event with TechWadi. I'm very proud of the role that you are playing along with TechWadi in really promoting the links, especially in entrepreneurship between our community, our Arab community in diaspora, and both the United States and their countries of origin and back in the Arab world. Dr. Atef gave a very good example of these kinds of links with also his very generous scholarship that he's provided to Berkeley University, and I think some other universities in the working. I think, needless to say, that I'm very proud of my community in the not only in the Bay Area, but beyond in the West Coast. And I'm very happy to be back here in this room where I gave few presentations during my time in San Francisco, and I have very good interactions with Berkeley students and professors. So this is also quite an opportune time to discuss Turkey and the Middle East because of Turkish successes, and also because of the turmoil that the Middle East is going through. I mean, of course, we sometimes call it the revolutions of the Arab Springs, and we sometimes call it the disappointment or the failed high expectations that came about after those revolutions. It depends on where do you stand on this, on these recent developments. I can at least provide you with the angle of the Turkish-Egyptian relationship and how business relationships especially played an important role in motivating the inspiring impact that some of the other speakers spoke about, and the envy impact that others also referred to. I don't know whether, yes, they were able to get us. You can see our two countries, Turkey and Egypt, how similar they are. About the same size. Ours is 1 million kilometers, theirs is about 800,000 kilometers. Population size almost the same, 80 something in the case of Egypt, 70 something in the case of Turkey. Young population, like most people in this room. More than half of our population is less than 28. If you look up using the measurement index, if you look up any index and put the two countries' indexes together, you would find almost a similar portfolio. Especially if you are looking at portfolios back in the 90s, 1990s, or late 80s. Even economic developments indexes are the same, population growth are the same, almost. Of course, there was a major leap forward by Turkey in the last 10 years that was outlined by previous speakers. And even we continue to keep the same percentage of our income spent on education, health, otherwise, all public expenditure, but because of the fact that Turkey tripled its GDP and its other source of income in the last 10 years, that meant for the same size of population, of course, their share of public spending on education, health, other public services is almost tripled. With this background, I need to remind you that Turkish-Egyptian relationship has been mutually educational, not in the last 10 years, not in the last 20 years, but maybe over centuries. Turks settled in Egypt before they settled in Anatolia, back in the 9th century. Actually, Egyptians learned Turkish while they were still learning Arabic. And some of those Turks, the Mamluks, was able to even rule Egypt in less than 100 years of their stay in our country. But since the 9th century, Egyptians were keeping an eye on Istanbul, and Turks were keeping an eye on Cairo. There was young Turks, there was young Egypt. In Egypt, people showed great admiration of Kemal Atatürk, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And even some of our leaders, like Nasser and Sadat, look to Atatürk as a great example of nationalism, as a nationalist, a modernizer, etc., etc. And that didn't stop in the 60s with Nasser and even beyond. The other way, when Turkey opted to privatize its economy, it looked actually to the Egyptian example that started about 10 years earlier with Sadat in the late 70s. Turkey started its privatization in the 80s. And they actually hired some Egyptians. One of them is the former Minister of Trade and Industry, Mohammed Rashid, as part of their advisory committee that dealt with the financial crisis of Turkey in 2000 and 2001. By the same token, all of my visitors, Egyptian visitors, especially officials, but intellectuals and non-governmental organizations, whenever they come down to Istanbul and I receive them, and they haven't been to the city for 10 years or so, they look around and see how developed the city is today. And they say, oh, they did that in 10 years. Then we still have hope. So this is the envy factor working in. It was reinforced by the fact that many of the Turkish entrepreneurs brought their business to Egypt. Of course, they were motivated naturally by the cultural background, the common historic, but as all businessmen, basically by cheaper labor price rates, cheaper energy costs, and access to markets that goes beyond the big market, young market of Egypt, the 85 million Egyptians. No, actually access to Africa through free trade COMESA arrangements, the common markets for the Central and South Africa. 900 millions size-wise. Free customs access to the United States through the quiz agreements, were free of tariff agreements, through a trilateral agreement between Egypt, US, and Israel. But they were also motivated by how easy the access to those markets are. Of course, if you look again, it's 1.5 hour flight from Istanbul to Cairo, 140 minutes. If you use sea lines, you are looking at less than 24 hours time of voyage. So Turkey looked at Egypt back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Since the time of Turgut Özal, President Özal opened up to the whole Middle East, but started with Egypt, because of the fact that there was less sensitivities in dealing with Egypt. Of course, during the Ataturk early heritage, there were some reluctance to deal with the rest of the Arab and the Muslim world, except for Egypt. I mean, Egyptian-Turkish relationship has continued and maintained its special nature regardless of who was in power in Turkey and who was in power in Egypt. Of course, with varying degrees. I am always referred to in Turkey as the ambassador during 4 eras. And that's very accurate, actually. My credentials was signed by former President Mubarak back in 2010. I served in Turkey through the Egyptian Revolution of January 2011. And during the time when the Military Supreme Council in Egypt took charge and sided with the opinion of the majority of Egyptians. And then through the time of former President Morsi, and then today at this transitional period where we have an interim government and an interim president. Throughout those different eras, I can tell you that Turkish-Egyptian relations continue to flourish. Many people talked about competition between the two countries during Mubarak time. But at that time, Egypt was the first country to sign a free trade agreement. First Arab country to sign a free trade agreement with Turkey. And because of which, trade with Turkey quadrupled over 3 years, from 2007 to 2010. And it continued to increase throughout the revolution time and afterward. Also, back in 2007, we had very limited number of Turkish entrepreneurs working in Egypt. Today, we have more than 480 companies, Turkish companies, registered in Egypt. At least 290 of them have operations, and about 67 Turkish factories are running in my country. And they are not only bringing with them the ability to export to other markets and to produce for our own, but they are also bringing with them many of the solutions that could be utilized by Egyptian entrepreneurs and by the public sector in Egypt. And this is why I think a trilateral relationship with other partners like US business people, European business people, and African business people, for example, would be very beneficial for the three parties. And let me cite some examples. Most of the Turkish factories in Egypt are in the textile business. And of course, you know that Turkey are very well known in both textile and construction. They're about number 2 in both areas, all over the world. And many of those businesses, textile businesses, moved to Cairo, of course, to save money on the production. But meanwhile, they were using Egyptian labor and were using, in most cases, Egyptian also management teams. They brought mid-level technology, and it was heavily dependent on labor, something that would fit perfectly the Egyptian developmental needs. And those companies are exporting to very advanced markets, OECD markets like the US. Actually, of course, they don't publish all of their figures, but it is more than $500 million worth of exports. At the same time, when Egypt is facing problems with its public sector textile industry that has tens of thousands of workers, and through the help of entrepreneurs from both countries and third countries, we can make use of the Turkish expertise to reform and revamp our industry. I'm only citing one example here, not to bore you, but believe me, we have identified at least 10 major areas. In construction, for example, they have a pioneer example of developing slum area, urban development, of developing slum area using their construction companies, private construction companies, without any interference from the government. And turning it into apartment buildings, but at the same time also green areas, and etc. Solid waste recycle, public transportation, etc. Many of the things that has been successful in the Turkish experience, and through entrepreneurs, we would be able to bring it to Egypt. We have very successful example that actually was copied in the last 10 years in hosting industrial developers from Turkey, simply giving them a desert land in Egypt. That happened back in 2008. And they turned this into an industrial park with all the infrastructure needed. Today, this same industrial park is hosting about 200 businesses, and actually half of them probably are multinationals, and half of those, about 25%, are of American origin. So there, I can see a great potential of US entrepreneurs allying themselves with Turkish ones to work in Egypt, especially in new industrial areas that would focus more on, for example, clean energy technologies, on IT technologies, and on startups and incubators for small and medium-sized businesses, new ones, especially by youngsters. We have started a similar project with the European Union. We call it Building Bridges. And I think there is another similar Building Bridges here by Dr. Qais al-Manoufi, one pioneer leader of our community as well, but building bridges between our community here in the diaspora and their homes. Building bridges in the Turkish context was a Turkish Arab European bridges, and we started 4 business people. We wanted to make use of the Turkish experience to apply European standards. In their process of joining the European Union, the Turks needed to adapt to European standard. And that was not only limited to economics, to discipline, to physical discipline, but it went beyond democracy, rule of law, transparency, etc., etc. We wanted to use this experience, and we also wanted to network European, Turkish, and Egyptian entrepreneurs, in our case, to work on projects in Egypt and in Turkey with the help of the European Union. And this came very handy when we had the Syrian crisis erupted. Turkey has the largest fleet of trucks that used to transport European goods and Turkish goods to the Gulf via Syria. And of course, with the war in Syria, this was interrupted. So we have developed a RoRo, a roll-on, roll-off, a maritime transport line coming down from the southern shores of Turkey to Alexandria and Damietta in Egypt. Those trucks would roll off and drive through Egypt to Hurghada and Qusair on the Red Sea. And then they would sail again on another RoRo to the Saudi Arabia shores and then to the rest of the Gulf, and vice versa. They would save on the fees of the Suez Canal, and also they would give us the potential to carry goods both ways. Similar investment in the case of the US, for example, using the quiz formula, or with the US helping many of the Turkish companies have their own startup projects in Egypt, in one of those industrialized zones, could be looked at, especially by Silicon Valley companies. One last word about role of universities. And I know that many of you are involved not only in your university's activities, but in promoting those activities beyond the Bay Area. Also in Turkey, we have a good role model. I know that many people would like to avoid this word. When it comes to foundation universities, and when it comes to the role of endowments, not only in public education, in private education, in providing quality private education, but the role of endowments in providing public services as well, health and otherwise. This is another area where we are working with our Turkish brothers to bring together Egyptian universities with some endowment universities in Turkey in trying to create technoparks in Egypt. modeling those technoparks. I think one of the speakers was referring to the Bilkent Technopark earlier in the morning, and I think many of the technoparks in Turkey could really have a branch or a copy or a younger sister or brother in Cairo or Alexandria or Asyut. All of these initiatives actually originally came to us from Turkish and Egyptian entrepreneurs who worked together first and actually made profit, made money. And they thought that further cooperation would really enable both countries to benefit. As an ambassador, as an Egyptian ambassador to Turkey, I believe that those entrepreneurs will also play a major role in mending the fences, the political differences that are now erupting between the two countries. Probably you remember that back in January of 2011, Turkey, amongst other countries, including the United States, were the first to really congratulate the Egyptian people for their revolution, and also the Egyptian Armed Service for intervening back in January of 2011 to the side of the people, of the majority of the people, because at the time also our society was divided. That did not happen in July of 2013. And because of that, there are still some political differences between the two countries. I believe that those entrepreneurs, Turkish entrepreneurs working in Egypt, and those Egyptian entrepreneurs working with Turkey can help mend those fences. Of course, Turkey and other countries would ultimately be obliged to respect the will of the majority of Egyptians, as it has shown itself back in January of 2011 and again in July of 2013. And again, this is something for the Egyptians to decide for themselves. And I'm sure that Turkey and the rest of the world, for that matter, would respect the outcome of this process. My main concern is to use this time to help, first of all, making sure that this relationship is saved and continue to prosper, as it did through different eras and different governments in both countries. And second is to keep the good influence and inspiration alive. I remember when we had our first election for our diaspora, Egyptians voting in their embassies overseas. I remember that I got a call from the Turkish election committee and asked me to send 2 observers to copy our model for that. And there was no sensitivity whatsoever. Likewise, there are many of the things that actually Egyptian entrepreneurs, and for that matter even Egyptian politicians, can look up to the Turkish example and copy it, emulate it. And there was reference in the morning to the role of local government. And of course, Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey was actually trained first as a mayor of Istanbul and proved to be very successful. This is another area where we were also working with Turkey on that. There is the big issue of role of religion in the society. Of course, Prime Minister Erdogan mentioned the secular nature of the political system of Turkey in his speech at Cairo Opera, and it was not very welcomed by many of our Islamist political groups. But what I stress to my Turkish audience, that Turkey has friends in Egypt across the board in the Turkish society. And admiration of the Turkish experience is not limited to a certain group of people. Therefore, I believe that this relationship is going to continue and prosper regardless of who is in power or in government in Turkey or in Egypt. And I continue to believe that entrepreneurs, business people, and also educators and intellectuals are going to be the driving force there. And I would like their interest to continue to be active and present, even at the time when political relationships are not so ideal as we used to have them. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Abderahman. Our next speaker needs no introduction, of course, because he's the one and only Dr. Ossama. And Dr. Ossama as many of you know, Dr. Ossama has just an incredible set of talents. His involvement in so many projects, financing, incredible number of entities over the years, serving on countless number of boards. It's really hard to believe that he's really a one-man institution in effect. What comes to my mind, my own mind as a friend of Ossama, is when I mention his name or think of his name, are words like prolific, indefatigable, unstoppable, perhaps terms like multitasking, networking, were really defined by some of his experiences and actions. So please, as they say in entertainment, give it up for Dr. Ossama.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really very humbled by this introduction. With Ambassador Abderahman, it's always very, very hard to follow with his amazing stories, both about where we are and where we could be heading. I would like to focus my comments, knowing that I stand between us and lunch, on how to complete that trinity between Turkey, the Arab world, and Egypt in particular, and potentially the Arab American diaspora's engagement to help in economic development. Some of you may have heard of TechWadi. We are an Arab American diaspora community, copied after the global Irish, Thai, and Open. It's not a new model. And our involvement is in 4 areas. In the case of education, it actually starts at K-12, effectively with a program that was experimented with in Palestine. It's a 1 laptop per child, where today, because of MOOC, the massive open online courses, we are actually able to enrich it with Arabic content from the Khan Academy, as well as from Guru, which is a spin-out, if you will, from Google. That program today is actually being extended to Cairo with great help of Ahmed Abdul Qadir. I think Ahmed is still here. Yes, indeed. And he was a speaker with us this morning in Manshiyat Nasser through the Nibni Foundation. And the goal is actually to educate 20,000 children using extensive MOOC program that go outside of the curriculum of what is actually taught today in the schools of Egypt. On the entrepreneurial side, with the AUC Venture Lab, we now have a very nice program for entrepreneurship and innovation. It was an endowed program with the Willard Brown Chair, Luckily enough, even the State Department now likes it and would like to extend it to Palestine, and even Qatar University would like to adopt it. So it looks as if it's a program that between the hackathons and the boot camps and the entrepreneurship education related to conflict resolution, trust, performance, and focus on results can potentially have a good impact. Very different from, let's say, education for employment, but very focused on character and results, if you will. In incubation, there are so many incubators now around the world, 4,600. There are quite a few actually in Egypt. There are 20 of them. Maybe 2 or 3 are going to be fairly high impact. AUC is one, Smart Village and Flat 6 Lab, but also in Lebanon, Beritech. We actually started with Mohammed Bibani's efforts. One in Qatar with Enterprise Qatar that will be open once they open it for any Arab entrepreneur looking for subsidy on R&D, $1 million for product development, not in return for equity, and $200,000 of equity financing coming in from QInvest and Celatech and some other entities. In fact, Celatech will be here in about 4 days on UCB campus for those of you who would like to participate, attend and listen to the program that is designed to help entrepreneurs in business acceleration. In the case of mentorship, it is done by the TechWadi 100. These are people who have engaged mind and heart. 6 of them are here with us today. Dr. Atef, of course, is one of them. Ahmed, Sudi, Qais Minofi, Samir Kamal. Who am I missing? Muhammad, help me if I'm missing someone here. Very much to engage mind and heart, to help entrepreneurs get to the point whereby they can get to the second stage that they would like to achieve in their development. For example, if that second stage is to get angel financing or to hire human capital for platform development, or to reach the top 5 corporate clients that they would like to reach, then the role of the mentor is to actually help them to do that. It's very different from an advisor who imparts wisdom and history knowledge, but it's much more on achieving objectives, if you will. I do have data that will surprise you. It's unofficial, but actually the ratio of mentors to entrepreneurs is directly proportional today to the inverse. The success of a companies in business acceleration is directly proportional to the ratio of mentors to entrepreneurs. It has been done actually by Microsoft, and Ahmed, you know where it has been done, actually in Tel Aviv. If you have 1 mentor for every 20 entrepreneurs, you don't get anywhere. If you have 4 mentors for every entrepreneur, you are literally guaranteed to succeed. Our last engagement is in financing. We typically would invest $25,000 as individuals. Usually it will be 2 or 3 or 4 companies in early stage of a company development. In some very, very rare cases, venture capitalists get involved, but increasingly venture capitalist funds in the Middle East would actually co-invest with us in the same companies created in the Middle East, but they would not invest in them there, but if they were to come here. The first one will happen within a month, so we feel very, very comfortable that this model can potentially expand. In addition to that, with crowdfunding now becoming so incredibly high impact and popular, last year raising $300 million when crowdfunding was only 6 months old, if you will, it looks as if we can, for social entrepreneurship ventures as well as venture capital ventures, through a process for creating videos on the value proposition of a company and what have you, and using some of the crowdfunding sites that have been created in the Middle East, to be able to create a parallel economy that would help significantly accelerate the financing of early stage companies. When we started this program in 2010, which led to the Oasis 500 amazing incubator now in Jordan working, we said if we can manage in the first 5 years to create 50 success stories, which in venture capital terms typically would mean exits in excess of $50 million, then we would have actually succeeded. It's not an impossible target to have, it's a reasonably doable target, but I'm glad to share with you today, and I don't think it is a secret, that 2 members of our community within a year are likely to have IPOs of their companies exceeding $1 billion of market value. And all of this happens because people actually coalesce to create consensus and accelerate business development. And in the process, there will be many, many other smaller success stories. But at the same time, the highest impact ones are the ones that are likely to continue to make the program self-sustainable. Obviously, we alone are completely useless. Luckily enough, being in Silicon Valley, we have the advantage of working with some fantastic strategic partners. I'm going to comment just simply on two because the rest may be obvious to you, the incubators and the NGOs. If you look at the Skoll Foundation, Jeff Skoll, the first CEO of eBay, has been an absolutely amazing supporter for our program in Palestine, which led to the creation of women development centers. These women development centers create jobs through vocational training and within 3 years became self-sustainable. In other words, we no longer have to actually spend money to make them work. But let me focus on two other ones, universities and corporations. Google for Entrepreneur, Microsoft Azure, SAP HANA Platform. These corporations are actually reaching out to the Middle East today to maybe create that complement of the Trinity that we were referring to offer that platform, in other words, that services and technology for free. In some instances, to offer up to $200,000 of financing for entrepreneurs, sometimes for equity and sometimes without equity. Most importantly, to participate with us in any business plan competition to help bring those who are of the highest potential impact to be incubated and accelerated in Silicon Valley. And the role they play, I cannot thank them enough, to be honest with you. It has made all the difference in 2013. In addition to that, there are 3 entities in Qatar that have showed an amazing tendency to support as well. Enterprise Qatar is one, Ooredoo, which is QTEL, and the third one is Al Jazeera, who's obviously expanding in the United States and would like to have as much media content and fans and followers connected as they possibly can get from amongst the Arab entrepreneurs. But let's look at universities because Ambassador Abderahman mentioned their potential role, and of course Dr. Atef, the role that AUC is playing. Here at UC Berkeley, we are of course extremely grateful that it has educated Steve Wozniak, so now we have the Apple computer, Gordon Moore, and therefore we have Intel and we have microprocessors. But if you look at the impact in addition to where we are today of, let's say, MIT, 25,500 companies created in the last 30 years that employ 3.3 million people. Stanford University, which is right next to where we live, today the revenues generated by the companies created by alumni would place Stanford, not UBC, excuse me, not California, would place Stanford as the 10th economy. $3 trillion in revenues. As a consequence, we are 100% sold on the idea that universities can play an absolutely phenomenal role in innovation, promotion of entrepreneurship, creation of businesses, and as you pointed out, Dr. Atef, supporters who would come in and make that program a reality in less than a year. Question is now, in the heaven in which we live, can anything be done to replicate it in the Middle East? Now, people talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, and ecosystem, and my contention is that no matter how hard we try, recreating the ecosystem that leads to what we have here in Silicon Valley is impossible. Just the number of components that you can see is just way too large, and practically every one of them needs to be built. But even more of a challenge is how do you connect them? How do you get to the point whereby 1 + 1 + 1 = 10? I know that it is not necessarily something that is in our nature, if you will. So the alternative to try to recreate something that is impossible to do, particularly when the challenges, if you look at Egypt alone, I actually did project this immediately after the revolution to say, so what are the challenges? When you look at just the percentage of people, whether they are uneducated, let's forget about the young, let's talk about the unemployed, uneducated, no access to healthcare. And as I mentioned sometimes to friends of mine, when you go to a place like Manshayat Nasser Ahmad, and you see an 18-year-old woman living under a bed for the last 9 years because she has a broken hip, is completely immovable, and there is no medical facility around. you say, for God's sake, that cannot continue. Therefore, that focus initially on education, healthcare, and vocational training becomes, if you will, a priority, and complemented with employment creation through corporate partnership and multinational engagement would be perfect. This fantastic list that is a homage to Turkey, says how amazing a model it is, was actually published in June 2013. And it was actually a study, it's an independent study that says this is such a wonderful model of economic development. And the reasons are listed here right behind. You can see that all what we have is to emulate. It came at a time when I was personally very, very enthusiastic about the mission that Ambassador Abderahman led, bringing 250 top Turkish businessmen to visit Egypt. It was in April 2011. And hoping that through this conference and follow-ons, we can reconnect with them and try to do something that may have slowed down, but never will stop. And with that, I would say it's not only Egypt, but the rest of the Arab world. The sky is the limit as long as we connect and work together. Thank you very much.
We have a bit of time for questions.
Yes. Just a few things here. You know, it occurs to me that one of the biggest challenges we have in the Middle East is really to break down the barriers inside the Middle East, but perhaps even more effectively to find a way to connect with the world. Because we traditionally in the Middle East, and I know a little bit about, you know, Egypt and Arab countries. I know less about Turkey. And I'm going to invite Ambassador Rahman and Dr. Ossama to comment on this. How do we join the 21st century, breaking down the barriers? Because we have our own culture, we have our own civilization, which we're very proud of, and we're very reluctant to, you know, have the uniform conformity with the world, you know, organizations, laws, and this is not new. It goes back to, I mean, you know, some of you may know this. Gutenberg invented the printing press like 1450 or thereabout. It took about 20 years, covered virtually all the European countries. It was 200 years later when it was introduced in Istanbul, and even then they had to form a commission of sheikhs to approve anything that's going to be printed. And Egypt didn't get its first printing press until Napoleon brought it in 1797. Of course, you know, these are prehistoric times in effect, and things travel much faster than this, but I think we have to live in open societies. We have to be part of the universe we're living in, because the world is not going to wait for us. So any comments would be appreciated from Ambassador Abderahman first.
Well, actually, of course, our generation worried about that for some time. I don't have this worry about our sons and daughters' generation. I think they know no barrier. I think my two sons are graduates of UC Berkeley, and during their time, one of them is here, Walid, and during their time of study here, their American colleagues used to bombard me as a consul general here with questions about Egypt, government, human rights, you name it. I mean, and they were not doing any specific research projects about Egypt. They were just following and reading. In Turkey, we have even more interest. Believe me, I mean, the average Turks read much more about Egypt than he reads about maybe his own politics in Turkey. I mean, there is, especially after January 2011, there is this, how to put it, great admiration exchanged between young people, I think all over our region. I don't know about the rest of the world, but especially about what's going on, and they believe that they should be the one who move things around. And it's not only in January 2011, but in July 2013, it was not the political parties in Egypt who made any move. It was the youngsters who started the Tamarrud movement. And those youngsters were the ones who went around and collected petitions asking for early elections, etc., etc. What I'm trying to say here, and that applies also to entrepreneurs. Dr. Ossama was referring to the role of universities in this regard. Many of the youngsters, both in Egypt and in Turkey, are the ones who are starting startup projects in both countries for across the country activities between Egypt and Turkey. But I see great potential here for a university like UC Berkeley or other California universities. Not only in funding those projects or not even transferring technology for it, but I think the engagement of youngsters, especially those coming from originally from our part of the world, like from TechWadi and others, I can see that a conference like this can be very specific about the Arab world, Turkey, and the United States. What are the potential projects that we can work on? And maybe you can have lists of those projects identified and screened by many of those quote-unquote mentors. Because in Egypt, for example, I think the ratio that Dr. Osama referred to is much worse than in the rest of the, at least in the Southern European area, if you look at the statistics. So you can provide us with those mentors. You can provide us with the hosting those activities, though, I think would be much more advisable to have them in the Middle East, whether Egypt, other Arab countries, or even Turkey. It would be much more convenient. It would generate a lot of attention and economic activities, but also geographic proximity is very important for others to go in and at least watch and learn, rather than having it here at the Silicon Valley.
So I'll just make 2 quick comments. With the MIT Enterprise Forum, the number of participants now in the Arab Startup Competition is approaching 15,000. So there is absolutely no doubt that this is the age of entrepreneurship for the Arabs, so much so that this year, on the 28th of October, instead of launching it online, we are launching it simultaneously in 20 cities around the Arab region. So that transformation is actually now evident in number and becoming so compelling that we have decided to actually have 3 tracks, one for companies with ideas, one for companies at early stage, and one for companies that need Series A financing. In other words, they are up and growing and now need to get to the point where they can be, if you will, success stories. So that's one comment. The second one is, we obviously, you know about the controversy regarding FIFA 2022 and Qatar's hosting, and it's going to be hot, and so on and so forth. We met one amazing woman, Fatma Al-Ghanem, who is taking now an amazing leadership position in FIFA 2022, and of course they're looking for innovative ideas and what have you from the Arab entrepreneurs, and they certainly have the money to finance it. But we were in a gathering of, some of you know about the Endeavor program for mentorship. in a gathering. We were about maybe 50 people, and she happens to be with us at the time, as well as her brother. And as each person introduced herself or himself, I looked at him and I said, Shaheen, do you not feel like me that this is the golden age of Arab women leaders? And he said, absolutely. And his sister is obviously one of these examples. I think that the role that the women are playing in the Arab world now, including protesting and taking personal video for driving a car in Saudi Arabia at the risk of being arrested, is something not to be ignored. We are doubling the impact.
Thank you, Dr. Ossama and Ambassador Abderahman.